Change of pace and switch of gears here for a story that I must confess made my jaw drop, and I've been doing this long enough that very few things make my jaw drop. I had never heard of this before, but it's out there, and we're going to learn about it tonight from Emily Taylor, a former prosecutor and an independent program attorney with U.S. LawShield, one of the country's leading voices on the Second Amendment. Their website, uslawshield.com. It has to do with an increasing number of schools out there which are fielding teams. These are high school competitive teams, shooting teams. Emily Taylor, thank you for being with us.
No, I'm happy to be back.
This is, I must confess, I think a splendid idea, but I must confess I am amazed in this era of the PC Nazis that this could ever get off the ground, much less become wildly popular.
You know, it is amazing. It seems like if you just put the words school and gun too close together in a sentence, someone is going to lose their minds about it. And so it really is amazing that this is grabbing hold. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that, and maybe I'm in the minority here, but I think this actually could be a solution to a lot of the problems we have right now.
Well, it certainly strikes me as an amazing idea. For the record, by the way, the Minnesota State High School Clay Target League Championship bills itself as the largest shooting sports event in the world. And with the bustling crowds and flood of corporate interest, it could be mistaken for, say, a scene on the NASCAR circuit, except that the stars are teenage boys and girls, and they're armed. This is amazing. Tell us some more about this, if you are familiar with how it really got going and the basic, I guess, rules of the game, if you will. I assume that these are high school students who compete as others do in skeet shooting, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it is increased by something like 171% in the last several years. It's growing rapidly. It gives kids the opportunity who may not be, maybe not just, number one, athletically inclined enough to really participate in a sports team, but also, there are kids who are in wheelchairs, who have, real physical limitations, who can compete in, their high school clay shoot team. It's done off campus. It's funded mostly by private funds. And it's really bringing, both boys and girls get to compete together, and it's bringing kids to a space where it's a lot more inclusive than your traditional high school sport. And it's really, it's spreading like wildfire.
I hadn't thought about that, but of course, yes, indeed. You don't have to have strong legs in order to shoot. That's true. Yeah, that had escaped me.
Absolutely.
Now, I know that at the Minnesota High School Trap Shooting Championship, more than 8,000 students from 300 schools gathered not that long ago to hit, of course, the orange discs out of the sky over 9 days. And there were RVs filling the parking lot, sponsor tents of the U.S. Army, Friends of NRA, and this sort of thing lined the Alexandria, Minnesota shooting park. And I find that just amazing that you have this kind of support, especially, let's say, the private sector support. Again, you don't really see the local Ford or Chevy dealership sponsoring the football team or the school band as a general rule.
Sure. This stands out a little bit because of the politics. There are many who are uncomfortable devoting a lot of the school funds to the sport. So it really cries out for the private sector to participate. I also, I think and I hope that there are a lot of people out there like me who hold this belief. For, anyone who is even vaguely aware of what's gone on in public, in the news in the last decade and a half, 2 decades, that the mass shootings and the school shootings have, they have increased. And Some of it is a function of a 24-hour news cycle, but some of it is a function of, we just see some more of these things now. And here is something that I want people to remember is that the AR-15 is not a new weapon. And
that is again, the semi-automatic civilian version of the Army's M16. Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely. And that is the weapon of choice for many of these mass shooting instances. And a lot of people want to blame mass shootings and school shootings on the AR-15 and on specifically, we're looking at a Sandy Hook lawsuit right now that's blaming that shooting in part on Remington's marketing to young men in order to boost their masculinity. But here is, I think, something that we need to keep in mind is that the AR-15 rifle has been on the market since the 1950s, and kids today have less access to firearms than they ever have, that they certainly have had since the 1950s. They are not a part of the culture in the way that they were in years prior. And I think that there is something about the weeding out of firearms in our popular culture as anything but this sort of video game tool for bloodshed that sort of create something sexy about that. And we need to get back to a place where these are tools for recreation, in addition to, if you must defend your life with it, a tool to defend your life and to actually cause harm to another human.
A practical application, if you will. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. We'll come back and talk some more with Emily Taylor. She is with USLawShield.com, and we're looking at the growing prevalence of high school shooting teams. That's right, actual interscholastic sport activity. What a great idea. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. I'm truly amazed at the phenomenal growth in high school shooting teams. Nothing like that ever existed when I was growing up. A lot of people went out and did a lot of shooting, skeet shooting, deer, turkeys, what have you. But it wasn't part of the school scene, not even remotely, although you would see people certainly showing up at school with guns in their pickup, and they would head out. Sometimes they'd be out hunting before school. But I'm sure, Sidney Powell, that there are people out there who are thinking that the NRA being behind such a program is that they're just giddy, telling kids this is how you blow people away. No, 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 no. My first introduction to guns was, I guess, about the age of 12, something like that. Well, my father had taken me out with a little single-shot 22, but I attended an NRA safety course, and that was what it was about. Safety, 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 safety. A gun is always loaded. It was drummed into our heads, and I cannot imagine a more positive, constructive program than the one that I experienced, Sidney.
And this is really interesting, and I think there's 2 points to be made here. First, the fact that the NRA is actually contributing financially and trying to boost this program is, something that's a little polarizing, but it also is, it's politically motivated, and the NRA themselves will admit, yes, of course, these are future voters, and, it's not that they are engaging in some secretive, insidious brainwashing of our children. It's that they say, we put a firearm in someone's hands, we teach them how to use it safely, and we have essentially made a convert into someone who understands that this is, not only a constitutional right given to them, but something that is really useful and to be taken seriously and not to be, either abused or neglected. That's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about is you mentioned the safety courses and how important kind of just the whole spectrum of learning is here. There is, over the course of, I suppose, 11 years now since this program really got off the ground, there has not been a single injury within this program, which is very important.
That certainly is. And again, that says about all that you need to say. There are others I know who note other positive aspects about all of this. positive aspects, for example, just in terms of self-confidence. Sydney Gilbertston joined one of the Minnesota teams from Waconia High School when she was 13. Her older brother was a shooter. She was the only girl in the squad. She said, "It took me out of my bubble." Gilbertson is now 19 and a freshman at the University of Minnesota. And she says, quote, "I owe my confidence to trap shooting. It's the best thing I did in high school. If this were taken away from kids, I don't know what I would have done." And she says, "I am very attached to it." So this is something else that I think people need to remember. If you talk about the question of alienation of young people, this opens doors. There are any number of people out there who may not have enough mouth, let's say, to be on the debate team or a musical bent to be in the band, and they may not be physically up to being on the football or basketball teams. This is an outlet for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And, anyone who is worried that putting a firearm in a high school kid's hands is going to create a mass shooter is really out of line here, because not only is that not how school shooters are made, number one, but number two, exactly what you just said, which is you give these kids who maybe are not the most outgoing, maybe they're not the most athletic, maybe they didn't have another place to easily excel and make friends and be part of a community. You give them another outlet and another opportunity, and you are far more likely to take a child out of that danger zone of wanting to cause harm to others in their school than you are to create someone who wants to do harm just because you've handed them a firearm.
And yet somehow I just have the feeling that this is not what the PC crowd means by inclusivity.
I don't think that it is, no.
In fact, I'm amazed that all of this exists. What I'm really, I think, as much amazed about as anything else is that I've learned about it as such a positive program, that I haven't learned about it by mass demonstrations against high school shooting teams, another fascist activity being pushed by white nationalists, blah, blah, blah. You can make up the rest of it. I'm surprised I haven't heard that at all. If there are protests about this, I haven't heard about it. I've only heard about the positive side, and I'm pleased but astounded.
Yeah, and I think that the sad reality is it is only a matter of time until the outrage and the protests are sparked. The more popular this becomes, the more likely we are to see the outrage train start to gear up, and that's just nothing. It is not a reflection on this program. It's not a reflection of any of the data, any of the facts, any of the anecdotal stories we've seen from kids participating about this program. It is just a reflection of the politics of the day.
1-866-50-JIMBO, our number, as we speak with our guest in this portion of the program about a remarkable program, and again, one that I am very, very, very pleased about. Again, Emily Taylor, our guest from USLawShield.com. This is Paul in Cleveland. And Paul, good evening.
Good evening, Jimbo and guest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yes.
I went in the Army in 1983, in the spring of 83. And in basic training, I remember leading up to the training on the M16, they had us, my platoon sergeant, under a shade tree, had us lay down in the prone position for this instruction block leading up to, eventually getting on the range and learning how to fire the M16.
Mm-hmm.
And we were laying there on the ground listening to the platoon sergeant instruct us, and I was doodling in the dirt. And I had never had a weapon in my hand or done any. I'd seen one or two people fire a weapon one or two times in a rural community up in northern Michigan.
Right.
And so I'm laying there, I'm doodling in the dirt, and the company commander snuck up and happened to be watching me for a few minutes without me knowing it. And he suddenly made a scene and said, soldier, you've got the attention span of a 2-year-old.
Okay.
And a couple of weeks later, going through the whole, get on the range and
right.
and learn how to use the weapon, and I fired 42 on 42 targets successfully.
That's pretty good.
Without
for
ever
a person who never
having...
shot before, that's phenomenal. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I guess that shows that the military teaching method is pretty good, and you're a good shot.
Well, and my platoon, out of 5 platoons in the company, won everything company-wide. We won everything in all competitions.
That's pretty good. I gather, therefore, that from this interesting anecdote that you support the notion of the high school shooting teams. Would that be correct? Or
I think I do.
Okay.
And the reason I think I do is because the initiation process.
Yeah, well, I agree. Yeah. We're a little short on time, but an interesting story, and we'll be back with more in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show, 1-866-50-JIMBO, as we talk with Emily Taylor from USLawShield.com about the prevalence of high school shooting teams out there. This is Chris in Eaton Rapids, Michigan. Eaton Rapids, Michigan. Go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, Jimbo.
Good evening.
And you guests there. I think that's a great program. And those young people being around all those good people and learning the respect for the guns and the safety and stuff like that, and learning that way of life and that perspective on life, if nothing else, will encourage maybe better choices later in life, reflecting on all those good people in that good situation in case, the different lifestyles come into perspective that aren't so compatible with that. And being around, something like that, like we was when we was kids, gives you that, without thinking about it, respect for that, to where it's just you're not going there. When it comes to people that end up getting involved with drugs and crime, or have a chance to, or somebody else they're associated with, they know is doing something, they know not to get involved with that. I mean, I think that helps.
Well, I would have to think that you're onto something there, Emily.
Oh, absolutely. This lends a discipline that, again, like we talked about, a lot of these kids aren't finding in other organized sports or organized activities. So much so that, in fact, some of these coaches mandate diets for the kids and say, you can't have sugar or caffeine within an hour of your shoot, because they want to be sure that they are, not only safe, but, focused. And so it is, I think, only a good thing. And I wish that there were more people who saw it that way.
1-866-50-JIMBO. And we go to Steve, who is in Rolla, Missouri tonight, listener to KTTR Radio. Hello, Steve.
Good evening. How are you?
We're well, thank you.
Good. Hello to your guest. I was listening to your show, and I remember it was probably 67, maybe 68. We had a school assembly, and the entire school came from 7th grade on up, and we had a hunter safety course. A conservation agent came and gave this hunter safety course to the entire school. And you sure wouldn't have something like that going on today.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm sorry to say, I think you're probably right. But then again, I see this, and briefly, Emily, I have to wonder, maybe it's time for something like that. We've got about 10 seconds here for a parting thought.
Oh, 10 seconds isn't nearly enough. I hope so, but I see the tide turning away from it before it swings back towards more of this, and hopefully I'm wrong.
Well, I must confess I tend to be a little pessimistic myself, but anyway, stay on the line. We'll speak off air. And again, Emily Taylor from USLawShield.com. I'm Jim Bohannon, and this is Westwood One.